Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Standard H podcast, a casual conversation about the lives of entrepreneurs and those growing companies. This podcast has been a wonderful supplement to my apparel brand, Standard H, which serves up elevated casual automotive and travel-inspired apparel and accessories to you discerning car and watch lovers. It's been a blast recording these episodes, and if you like what you hear, please visit standard-h.com and sign up for our email list. Our recently revamped website not only hosts every episode of this show, but also allows you to explore the entire product assortment and our latest travel recommendations. As an email subscriber, you will then receive offers no one else is privy to, and I can promise it'll be well worth your while. Just hit pause real quick and hop over to standard-h.com to sign up. We'll be here waiting for you to hit play when you return. Watch collecting is often described as a journey, and along these roads of exploration, you may encounter independently owned brands you've never heard of creating some of the most incredible timepieces. If you're in search of these brands, look no further than Passionfine Jewelry, owned by former Standard H podcast guest Tim Jackson. Offering incredible timepieces as well as phenomenal customer service, Passionfine Jewelry is California's largest independent watch dealer located right here in Solana Beach, just north of San Diego. There you will find Roger Smith, Gronfeld, Kudoke, Habring, Sarpaneva, Roman Gauthier, and many more. If you can't make it to California, visit passionfinejewelry.com for their entire offering online. This episode is also brought to you by Cantonment. Cantonment's flagship product, the kerchief, is a perfect medium between a handkerchief and a bandana. Featuring iconic designs such as a Fender Stratocaster and the dashboard of a Volkswagen GTI, these utilitarian cloths are an item that should be a mainstay in your everyday carry. Tuck one in a back pocket or use one as a neckerchief. Visit them at Cantonment Co., that's CANTONMENT.co, and use the code STANDARDH in all caps, no spaces, for 20% off their entire online shop. Now let's get to the show. As a watch enthusiast, it's tough not to utterly admire what Max Büsser has brought to the industry. Not just his products, but his approach to business and collaboration as a whole. He and I certainly share the mindset of such platitudes of a rising tide lifts all ships, and knowing it takes a village, so to speak. And it is his love of community that originally sparked my interest in his company, Max Büsser and Friends. There's some interesting background on him naming his company as well. Max's professional journey is fascinating, and though he warned me that he tends to ramble, his talking really only exposed how much about him I didn't already know. He has a wonderful way of articulating why his company is the way it is, and so much so, he often answered questions before I even asked them. I'm proud to share this as I haven't heard Max speak this openly about his company, including the advantage of being scared and welcoming competition. I think you're really going to appreciate what he has to say. When we wrap things up bringing cars into the mix, Max shares his passion for hand-built cars. Though I guess I shouldn't have been surprised, it's also not every day one discusses the likes of TVR Griffiths and Weissmans. This conversation was such a pleasure to take part in, and I couldn't be more thankful for Max and his time. We actually chatted for about 15 minutes after ending the podcast portion, where Max asked me questions about Standard H, clearly illustrating his openly caring nature. I may be biased, but I feel like the world needs more creative, outside-the-box, thought-provoking business owners who actually care about others and aren't so insular and selfish in their thinking. In other words, more people like Max. I'm your host, Wesley Smith, and you're listening to the Standard H podcast. I usually chat a little bit ahead of these things, but I have so many questions for you that I do want to just jump into it. And again, thank you so much for taking the time, Max. I really appreciate it. I'm a big fan of MB&F. I'm curious, who is your customer?
When I started off, I had no idea who would be loony enough to actually follow me on this trail. Who is my customer? He or she is all over the world. That's I've discovered over the last 17 years, actually. I just create products I'm insanely passionate about, thinking nobody's ever going to buy them. Mm-hmm. And then people actually resonate on the same wavelength. So who are those people? Interestingly enough, a majority are entrepreneurs.
Hmm.
Psychologically, they're people who are very interesting. They're usually outliers in the fact that they don't care what people think of them. If you're going to be the usual big four watch brand customer, you're pretty much sensitive to what people think of what you're wearing. If you're wearing an MB&F, you actually don't care.
Right.
Most people have no idea what it is. Most people don't know the value.
Hmm.
And most people will think you're absolutely nuts to have spent that sort of money on a watch, which is not one of the big four. So you end up with customers who are really interesting profiles, pretty much self-asserted and saying, I love it. I think what I've noticed over the years is the why of the company is as important as the what, if not more, actually, is why MB&F exists, why, how we do things, the values we're trying to defend. That really resonates on our customers. And then often the product is, oh, I want a product from them, rather than I want that product and then I discover who are the people actually making it.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Has your customer evolved at all? Or have they been sort of the same since day one?
Well, some have aged, like me.
Fair
So
enough.
I created the company, and the first piece came out 15 years ago. I was 40. I'm 55 now. So I used to think I had a very young customer base. Those initial customers have aged with me, and there's a
Hmm.
whole new group of younger customers coming in. Geographically, they're still very much spread all over the world. Maybe the markets have evolved a little bit. Southeast Asia used to be 10 years ago by far number one market. Now it's
Hmm.
the US. But generally, I have no single market which stands out. Like many of the high-end brands are like, oh, China. We're not even in China. We're not in China. We're not in Japan. We're not in Korea. We're in the many big markets where you can't find our pieces.
Mm.
So no, it's very interesting. I think also, sorry, I can ramble a lot. So you cut me short if you think I'm rambling. Um,
No, that's what these things are all about.
so I'm a great candidate for that. So I noticed also that our customers are mostly, I'm going to say, watch geeks.
Hmm.
They're people who actually know their stuff, and
Mm.
that's great for me, because I've got very few MB&F owners who just buy it because it looks cool.
Right.
I was a bit scared of that initially, that people would just look, oh, it looks cool, let's buy it. Like, okay, why not? But as a creator, you would like people to understand, your customers to understand what you've gone through and what's gone into it. And that's what
Sure.
happened.
Yeah.
What I love now is I've got a lot of younger, and I'm going to say younger just because they're more recent collectors who started off with a Nomos and then gone on to a pre-owned Jaeger and then gone on to et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they've gone up that food chain and they know what they're buying. And now they aspire to a Legacy 101, which is like, oh, and I get so many messages of people like, oh, finally I can afford one, but unfortunately I can't get it because now there's insane waiting lists on there, which is a whole other issue we're facing. I'm not going to say that I'm unhappy as a creator that there are people battling to get our pieces, but now we're getting into a whole other issue of how do we make sure that those who actually love what we do can get them,
Right.
only flippers.
Yeah.
That's very new for us. It's been the last 12 to 18 months. So you're saying the evolution of customers. Now we have people who just want to buy them because it's the cool thing to have or because they can make money. And oh my gosh, how are we going to deal with that is a real important chapter for us.
Sure. Yeah. Maybe we'll touch on that slightly a little bit later for sure. But it's a fairly large and open ended question here. What do you attribute your success to?
Hmm. Um, it's always difficult to give an answer while we're trying to remain humble.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, no, I could appreciate that.
I look, what I realize is the fundamentals of the company
Hmm.
are incredibly important. Is what I was saying, the why. It's we're here to inspire people to think differently.
Hmm.
Our first mission as a brand, as a company, as a team is not to create watches. It's to inspire people to think differently. Because we had the courage to do something that virtually or no one had, in at least in our little industry,
Hmm.
and we would love, and it's happening. We get so many messages. I get so many messages of people who say, you know what, I'll never be able to wear one of your pieces, but I actually decided to create my company, or I realized that being different or being weird, like I was as a kid, is okay. Or I started drawing again. That makes me so happy. This makes all of us so happy.
Right.
What we also realize is that we're here on this earth to create a community.
Hmm.
It has happened without us actually willingly wanting it, but there is a community of people who, of course, have assembled to create the pieces. There's a community which is the team internally, and of course, there's a community of owners and of people who resonate on the same wavelength. And one of my many wet dreams on my bucket list is I would like to create like a gigantic TED talk and invite all our MB&F owners to meet each other, because as we were saying before, they're really interesting people. So like I would like to share with them talks I've thought were interesting and that they could meet each other. I don't know if I'll ever be able to. That's one of the many things on my bucket list.
Oh, I think that's completely plausible. I mean, there's the Red Bar Global Meetup. They've done those before, pre-COVID, obviously, and I'm sure they'll most certainly happen again. I That could absolutely happen, and I think it's a wonderful idea. Yeah, it's such a cool thing how watches can bring people together in that way as well. Plus, I'm I'll speak for them. I'm sure they'd love to hear you speak and do a TED talk if you will. I just think that would be remarkable. But everybody, right, we're right. Yeah.
Me curating speakers, which really made a difference on me.
Oh, I see. Yes.
Yeah, it's not about me being on the
On the stage. Yeah.
stage. No, and coming back to your question, um, we are one of the very, very, very last watch creators which still has artisanship at the center of its heart,
Hmm.
where you can love or not what we do, but you cannot dismiss the insane work which goes into it. I mean,
Sure.
all the angling is still done by hand, all the engraving is done by hand. When we've got rubies, there's Châtenay in red gold, etc., etc. All those things which made my heart beat faster when I fell into watchmaking 30 years ago, and that
Right.
virtually, unfortunately, most brands have abandoned.
Mm.
That's also something that we offer. Most people don't even realize when they buy one of our pieces. Coming back to what could make people well, the success, of course, is having the courage to think differently.
Sure.
Um,
Well, can I interrupt you there? You're from Switzerland originally, right?
yeah, that's a bit counterintuitive, isn't it?
Right. So there is that, and I'm also curious. What did your folks do for work?
My dad was a German Swiss who didn't spend much time in Switzerland in his life. He traveled most of his life, and my mum was Indian, and they met up in India and got married there. And I was born in Italy, but then I was really brought up since I'm 3.5 years old in Switzerland.
Oh,
So I
wow.
was really brought up like a little Swiss boy. I felt like a little Swiss boy in a little village, and and I was lucky, I think, to have parents who were pretty worldly
Hmm.
and taught me that the world is not what I just saw through my window.
Sure.
Uh, and um, and so yeah, I wanted to, I wanted to be a car designer when I was a kid, and then I did engineering because I thought if I do engineering, then I can specialize into car design. So I did a master's in microtechnology engineering, and then I actually fell into watchmaking, and that was maybe 2020. Oh shoot, 31 years ago.
Did you ever work in high school or in your formative years?
Yeah, well, I was a cinema usher for 7 years.
For 7 years.
Well, from the age of 17 to 24, 17, I'm not allowed to say it because that's illegal. It's 18 theoretically. And so I would work just to make some pocket money. I had no money. My parents were completely middle class. I used to sell hi-fi on Saturdays at a hi-fi store. I
Oh,
used to give
cool.
math tuition on lunch breaks at my old school when I was in university. And so all these, I used to work on all these student, how do you call this? Um, when students assemble in college to actually create like a little company where they actually do mandates for companies. So we
Oh,
actually, I worked for Hewlett Packard and other things as students. They would give us mandates to, I don't know, do a market research and things like
sure.
that,
Yeah, yeah.
which we were a minority in Switzerland. People don't do that. They
Hmm.
just follow the usual stuff. In America, it's so normal that you do a gazillion things during your studies.
Right.
It was very, I think it's just because I was so bored doing my studies.
Right, right.
Didn't really enjoy them. And I, yeah. Actually, the other thing is my parents sent me, they really put a lot of money. They sent me to a private school
Hmm.
when I was a kid, and they wanted to give me the best tuition possible. And I know it's an enormous sacrifice for them. And I ended up in a school full of way higher than middle class children. And it was very tough for me because I was the only one who had no money.
Mm-hmm.
All that working on the side was trying just to catch up. And when we'd go out and have a meal, I would have like that pizza and tap water, and they would order that steak and wine. And at the end, when they want to cut the bill in, I was like, oh no, God, no, 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 no. So I had it was a tough, money was an issue when I was growing up because I was surrounded by people who had it and I didn't.
Mm.
But that probably did shape something in my life. But now,
Sure.
then afterwards, at some point in my life, I realized when I did start making a lot of it in my Harry Winston days, is that that was really not the goal. I thought it was at some point, probably in my life, and then when
Right.
I got it, this is what's the point of this? This
Sure.
being free, being happy, being proud was way more important, and that's how MB&F came to life.
Oh, that's wonderful. So were your folks were your parents creative at all?
Um,
Like where do you think your creativity came from?
I I wasn't surrounded by entrepreneurs or creative people when I was growing up. My dad used to work for Nestle, so a big corporation. He was pretty unhappy there, at least his last years, I remember, because I always used to hear him complain. My mum didn't work. We didn't really do much stuff. I think my creativity came from my boredom.
Oh, I
I'm an only
see.
child. So I was always all alone, and my parents lived up in a little village north of Lausanne, and I didn't have any means to go into town and meet my friends. So
Okay.
I was all the time alone.
Right. So you're dreaming all the time.
Just forces you to have this insane imaginary life and creative life. And I was drawing all the time, and I was imagining I was all sorts of superheroes, and I think that's what shaped me more than any example. Now, I have to say, that's what made it very difficult for me to actually create my company
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't think I had it in me.
Mm-hmm.
It was didn't seem natural when the idea started entering my head that I could do this or I should do this.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Wow. Well, you sold hi-fi, you said. Do you recall the first album you ever bought?
Yeah, it was a late bloomer. It was Abacab from Genesis.
Oh, nice. Phil Collins.
Yeah, and then it was something probably you don't know in the US. It was Jean-Michel Jarre.
Okay.
So Jean-Michel Jarre was one of the first. profits of electronic music, and he did these massive concerts. And so it shows exactly the insane eclectic tastes I had.
Well, yeah.
Album was probably Elton John. So I have always had insanely eclectic taste. My wife looks at me and she listens to my Spotify playlist. She's like, what is wrong with you? It'll go from opera to AC/DC to funk to, I mean, there are few musics I don't really like, very few, but I love everything.
Well, you grew up next door to Montreux Jazz Festival, right? I mean, how did you attend that often or no?
Yeah, in my older
Right.
age, of course. And often the part of Montreux is that you discover people or groups that you've never even heard of because
Right.
they're not of your era.
Sure.
And there were some insane concerts. I mean, I'll always remember Isaac Hayes.
Yeah.
Wow. There were like, yeah, Prince did a concert there, which was mind blowing. Nothing of his usual titles. He just improvised for like 2 hours. They were like absolutely insane moments then.
Wow, that's incredible. Well, you mentioned studying, I believe it was University of Lausanne, right? Is where you went? And you studied micro technology, right? What exactly does that mean?
I get that a lot.
What's a typical job that person would get outside of watches, obviously?
So it was focused on anything which was mechanical engineering meets electronics in small size.
I see.
So you could have robotics,
Mm-hmm.
have all sorts of things which were associated to that, but it was also production management, line management. It was semiconductors. It was optical science. It was very broad, and I actually chose it for that because I didn't want to be an engineer. Let's not forget that I wanted to be a designer. So I chose a background which was as broad as possible, which would allow me to understand the world of engineering
Right.
and then go and do my thing. And I'm very grateful that I actually chose that and didn't do something too specific,
Sure.
physics or whatever.
Right.
And so it basically what it teaches you is how to reason.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we had tests where the question was one line, and 2 hours later, or 3 hours later, and 10 pages later of reasoning and
Right.
equations, you would arrive to a result. It was interesting because even though it was a little bit primitive in those days, you wouldn't get failed if your result was wrong, but if your
Mm.
reasoning was right.
Right.
It was not, so if of course you got the result right, it's better. But it was, they would look at how you reason to try and solve this issue.
Right.
Something which I'm incredibly grateful because it's helped me my whole life. While I
Sure.
see that people who in my, again, teaching in university 35 years ago is very different to today, especially the university I went to, which has become top notch since,
Mm.
is people who went to like business, they they often I would look at them like, what you're saying doesn't make any sense because they probably in those days didn't have the mechanisms of
Right.
if then go to if then and try and find. It was like more copy paste stuff they were taught.
Mm-hmm.
This is how a great marketing plan is. And I think that's helped me because I haven't done an hour or a minute of marketing studies. And it really annoys me because I'm being credited to be like this great marketeer because I hate the idea of being a marketeer.
Right.
And I'm an engineer and I just look at the world and try and find solutions to the problems I have.
Right.
And that's what we've done. The whole of
Sure.
MB&F has been about that.
So when you left school, though, you started out at Jaeger-LeCoultre, right?
Yeah.
Now, what was that process like? How did you get the job and like, I mean, briefly, obviously, I mean, we can't encapsulate the whole experience here in this short period, but it seems like you climbed the ranks rather quickly.
So how did I get the job? It's an insane story, and I tell a lot of youngsters today or at college, uh, be aware of everybody around you.
Mm.
First of all, be aware of what you like and what you don't like. That's the first thing.
Mhm.
And if you something you really like, try and follow it. And I actually bumped into watchmaking because I did a project in my third year where it was sociology and engineering, and I could choose the title. And I just didn't understand why anybody would spend these insane amounts of money on antiquated technology. So it's because I didn't understand why people spent money on mechanical watches, which really didn't make any sense for me. So I actually did a study on that. Now, not forget, we're in the late 80s. The mechanical watch world is virtually dead.
Right.
And I send letters out to all these companies, Audemars Piguet and Vacheron Constantin, Breguet and Jaeger-LeCoultre, etc., etc. And because the companies were so small,
Right.
the CEOs wrote back to me personally. I'm just a student, right?
Right.
If you come to us that day at that hour, I will give you an hour. And I go there and start interviewing them, and all these people tell me the same thing. They say, we know what we're doing is totally pointless. We're probably going to die because that was the way they were going.
Sure. Yeah.
But if we do, something very beautiful will disappear. So somebody for the first time was talking to me about beauty in my engineering studies.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is, if we die, traditions of incredible artisanship and mentors who've trained their pupils, who then became mentors and trained their pupils, etc., will disappear. And so somebody started talking about humanity, and that's two things which lacked completely in my studies.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of, wow, that resonated. And I became crazy about mechanical watchmaking and put all my savings into my first beautiful mechanical watch. That was in 1990. I was still a student.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was interviewing with and I've told that story many times, with big companies, Nestle, Procter and Gamble, and others.
Sure.
And I was skiing one day with friends in Verbier. That's what us Swiss we do. And we stopped at a cafe, and there was Henri John Belmont, the CEO of Jaeger, who had interviewed. And, oh, how are you? Yeah, do you want to have a coffee with us? And he asked me what I'm going to do, and I say Procter and Gamble, Nestle, and jokingly I say, well, Mr. Belmont, if they don't give me a job, you can always give me a job at Jaeger. And he laughs, I laugh, and that's it. And then a week later, he has me called up. And would you like to meet Mr. Belmont again in the Vallée de Joux, in the manufacturer? And I'm like, yeah, sure. So I go and meet him, and it's the interview of my life. He's gonna interview me for basically 3 hours, I think, without asking me a question. He's basically selling me his dream of how he's going to save this company. Because in those days, and I had to do exactly the same thing later on in my life, nobody wanted to enter that industry. Nobody wanted to go and live in the Vallée de Joux. Nobody would definitely want to work for Jaeger.
Right.
And so he sold me his dream, and then he said, look, I've got a job for you. I need a young engineer who's going to be my product manager. We're going to create that job, and you and I were going to create all the products together. And
That's incredible.
it's a crazy story. So I owe so much. I mean, Henri John Belmont is the single most important. It's difficult to say, but he's one of the most
Yeah,
important people,
he's up there. Yeah.
because he took a gamble. He probably saw in me something I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
He offered me a job, and he welcomed me into that family, and it was really a family. And I found a place I was finally happy in. I had a purpose.
Right.
It was trying to save that company and working with insanely passionate people. Because in those days, we're talking 30 years ago, there were nobody in the watch industry because there was glam, glitz, or money, because there was none.
Right.
So if you're working in the watch industry, you were nuts. Because and when I chose that job, everybody around me, including my parents, questioned me like, "Are you really sure about what you're doing?
Right.
Why would you want to go and work for that soon-to-be bankrupt company?" And yeah, it's a leap of faith, and I owe him everything.
So how did you leave then? I mean, you mentioned Harry Winston earlier. You became managing director there at the ripe age of 31.
Which
What?
today seems old because everybody does stuff so early.
Oh God, I know. Just the pressure. Yeah. Well, so tell me about that departure. Like, how'd you feel? I'm assuming they approached you, or did you?
Yes, it was actually all the headhunters would approach me.
Yeah.
I would say no.
Hmm.
First of all, it was always usually the same sort of jobs in a different company for more money. And you're like, no, this is my family. I'm not going to just leave for money. That's not the point.
Yeah.
And then Egon Zender, who's one of the top three headhunters, they only do like chief executives. Um, they called me, and I was still just a little manager. And they interviewed me for an hour and a half and said, "Look, you're 10 years too young, but you could probably do this job." So what in the US probably would be president or something like that. In Europe is managing director of
Sure.
Harry Winston timepieces. So I just laughed and shrugged it off, and they said, "Look, you should try these interviews because anyway, there are 40 candidates, just try." So I
Right.
went there completely uninhibited
Right.
because I didn't have a chance in hell. And for 4 months in every interview, I just said exactly, spoke my mind, like brutal honesty, no filter.
Yeah.
Amazingly, they gave me the job. Now, I understood a little bit later that probably why they gave me the job is because Harry Winston Timepieces was virtually bankrupt.
Uh,
I think they maybe felt bad of hiring some seasoned executive who had a family if that company was going to go bankrupt in the next 6 months. And so they also took a gamble. Robert Benvenuto was the COO, and Mr. Winston, Ronald, took an incredible gamble with me. So that's my life has been about people believing in me when I didn't have half of their hope about myself.
well, that's incredible.
Yeah, it was a rough year. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
It was a very, very rough year. All the winds were against us. It was every time I'd open a drawer, it would explode in my face. I open a cupboard, the skeletons would fall on me. It was really, probably the roughest year of my life.
Wow.
And so with that little team I inherited, we were eight. We took us about 18 months to stabilize the company. And then from 2000 to 2005, it was rock and roll. That was those again 5 years which formed me, taught me that I actually could do this. I mean, multiply the company by 10, create the opus, create the factory, hire. I mean, went from 8 to 80 people in 5 years.
Sure. Wow.
We were incredibly profitable when I left. And it taught me that I actually had something in me which maybe would allow me to create my own company one day. So that's one of the many things I owe to the Winston family.
Okay, so there's a couple of things there to unpack. How did you stabilize the company?
Oh God.
I mean, in short, like kind of loose terms.
When I arrived, there was like, first of all, I have to think back because it's starting to date back. This is 25 years ago soon. Geographically, we had like one retailer who was doing like 75% of our business and buying everything at cost.
Hmm.
You have to have done business school to realize that that's
Yeah.
not a very good business. There was the products lacked. I mean, no, actually, I'm going to go take a step back. The whole why of the company was wrong in the fact that this incredibly high-end jeweler, because in those days Harry Winston was one of the greatest jewelers in the world,
Yeah, of
had
course.
this watch division where everybody wondered why they were doing watches. The watches were not at the level of the jewelry, which was super high-end. So first of all, was bringing the watch division and the watch product up to the same level. And I remember telling Mr. Winston that it's either you do the greatest watches or you don't do them because they're actually destroying your brand. So you should actually, I remember saying that in the interview, you should actually stop that entity. So how would we do that? We were not a manufacturer. We had no watchmakers. We were jewelers. So we needed a concept, and that was rare timepieces. So it was rare diamonds. That made sense if you had a lady's watch. So you had incredible, beautiful DE, flawless VVS1 diamonds from Harry Winston. Okay,
Sure.
that was a given. and rare movements. And I have to thank Ronald Winston to have followed me on that, because most jewelers would have thought in those days, why would we actually spend these insane amounts of money in really complicated movements? And I told him, if you just have quartz watches, you're just an accessory, and you'll always be considered an accessory. So let's do what the others don't do. Already in those days, I was a contrarian. Like, let the other jewelers always just do quartz watches or simple ETA automatic movements. Let's create incredible complications and then bring the watch brand at the same level as the jewelry brand. So we started working with like Agena already and Jean-Marc Videresh doing all the retrogrades. And of course, then there was the Opus. And it was all trying to showcase that Harry Winston was only trying to go for the best.
Right. So Opus was born as a result of that.
Yeah. Opus was more born out of trying to help François Paul the year he was launching his brand. Today he's a legend and an icon.
Sure.
21 years ago, when he tried to launch his brand, nobody knew who he was, and his first year was a little bit tough. And I remember we met like for 2-3 dinners that year, and he was telling me how tough it was. And one of the actually, I bumped into him we were on the same, our booth at Basel Fair was the same level one evening. And I said, well, why don't we do something together? And Harry Winston can tell the world what a genius you are, because it will have 10 times more impact than if you try and explain your talent.
Right.
Yeah, why not? And that's how it started.
Great. Well, what's your relationship like now with Francois Paul?
We've had our ups and downs. We'll just put it there.
Okay.
We're back on an up, I will say.
Oh, good. Enough said. I can also edit any of this out if you ever need me to. So
no problem. No. I'm just speaking my mind. And
yeah. All good. Well, I'd say MB&F is the epitome of collaboration. Obviously, you have and friends as a part of your name. Was this motivated by your time at Harry Winston, in helping FP and that kind of thing? Like, how did that come about, even just from a naming perspective?
I think it's a conjunction of, it's a good question. I don't think I haven't had that question. It's a conjunction of many factors. The first is my mom was a Zoroastrian. So Zoroastrianism is the oldest monotheistic religion in the world. It dates back to Persia, before the Jews, before the Christians. Wow. And they abide by simple principles of good thoughts, good words, good deeds. And treat people the way you want to be treated. I was brought up that way. So that was already something which was in me.
Yeah.
And I'm not at all a religious person, I have to say.
Right.
Those simple principles were important. So if I'm a supplier to a brand, I would really like that brand actually credit me. It's called empathy. Well, right. Of course, then we should treat people the way you want to be treated. I think the other reason was realizing that whoever you are, however brilliant or not you are nobody all alone. And that I had these crazy ideas that they were just going to stay crazy ideas if this whole posse crew of incredible talent wouldn't join me. So from the day one, I didn't want the brand to be my name. Because it's wrong. It just felt wrong. And actually the brand was supposed to be called B&F, not MB&F. And when I went to register it, when I was still working at Harry Winston, I went to register the brand. The attorneys were like, the IP lawyers were like, you can't do this. I'm like, why not? Bell and Ross. Bell and Ross had registered B&R everywhere around the world. So watch brand B&R, and I was arriving watch brand B&F. Of course, they were gonna block me everywhere, and that's what I would have done if I was them. They never did, by the way. But then the IP lawyer said you have to find another name.
Sure.
And I said, like, if I put M, so can we do MB&F? Because I didn't want. It seemed wrong that there's more focus on me because they're 2 letters for me. But I had to do it. So that's how it came to life.
Oh, that's funny. Well, How was it originally financed? I don't need numbers. I'm just kind of curious.
I'll give you numbers. So I had put aside over my 14 years of working, but mostly my 7 years at Harry Winston, I'd put aside $900,000, which
Wow.
is an enormous amount of money for most people. But it's a drop in the ocean if you want to create a mechanical watch brand, and meaning a brand which creates its own movements,
And with quality. Yeah.
standard movements from others. And I knew it. I knew I didn't have enough. So I put in everything into the company, and I thought maybe I could get away by actually convincing some of my retailers to pay me a third in advance my first HM1 based on drawings. So I created the company in July 2005. In November, I more or less had the finalized design following the engineering, which had already been done. And I went around the world for about 3 weeks to
Right.
meet all my most important Harry Winston retailers in those days
Oh,
and trying to sell them my new project. And six out of many actually were crazy enough to say, not only, yeah, we will buy those watches, and yes, give me your bank account and I will ship
wire you the
30%
money. Yeah.
value 2 years before you deliver. And that again, people I have to be very grateful to. It had never been done before in my industry, and I don't think it's ever been done since.
Right.
And I had no backup, meaning when the first guy told me no, I was destroyed. I suddenly, because you get, when you create a company, a startup like that, and you fall in love with your idea, and I see that with a lot of other guys who want to launch their brands, you don't listen to reason.
Right.
You've got these crazy ideas that, oh, it's going to work. You're in total
Right.
denial. It's what did Steve Jobs have? This, what is it called, reality distortion complex.
Right. Yeah,
You
exactly.
think that what you believe is actually going to happen, and I completely suffered from that.
Yeah.
When the first retailer said, "No, I'm not going to pay you," he said, "I'll order, but I'm not going to pay you," my world just dissolved. It was like,
Yeah.
God.
Right.
And luckily, then the second one did, and the third one did, and the fourth did, and the fifth did, and the sixth one did, etc., etc. And so that's how we started. So I that brought another about $700,000 into it. So my company was just me in my flat for the first 2.5 years, not giving myself a salary or living off my cash I put aside.
Sure.
And we were nearly bankrupt in June 2007, 2 years later. And luckily, it's all 1.6 million had gone.
Right.
And I managed to deliver, we managed to deliver, we were two by then in the company, the first two pieces on like mid-June. And then the first year, 2007, we managed to deliver the 25 HM1s we'd committed to.
Right.
In the difference, so I'd got 1/3, so I was getting paid the 2/3. The only problem is that the 1/3 was my margin. That's not a good business model either. Delivering products at cost for the first year, so that was
Right.
very also. And then 2008, we managed to start delivering products with margin, and the HM2 arrived, and everybody was going bananas. 2008 was very close to what we're living now,
Right.
meaning complete euphoria, and everybody was buying everything and anything at any price. I just never forget that in September 2008, a thing called Lehman Brothers went down,
Yes. Yeah.
and then everything crumbled. So with the industry being where it is now, my team, who's often much younger than me and haven't lived through that, don't understand why I'm totally paranoid and going, this can't last forever. This is not possible.
Right.
See when this is going to stop, when the music's going to stop.
Yeah, history potentially repeating itself. I understand. You've talked a bit about the whys behind, having people think differently, right? And I actually had that written down as a question for you: is what is the why behind MB&F? And excuse me, you've alluded to it. However, it also to me seems like part of it is pushing the envelope of how we display time as well as how we actually interact with a watch, not just thinking differently, but again, I'm speaking for myself here. Beyond the kind of ethics behind the brand and the ethos, if you will, but do you have any specific intentions when it comes to the design as far as like how the watches are perceived by the wearer or just fans in general?
So 17 years ago, when I started this whole adventure, if you'd asked me what my why was to create mechanical sculptures. It was to deconstruct traditional beautiful watchmaking and reconstruct it into a 3D sculpture, which gives time.
Mm-hmm.
Which, if you think about it, that can't be a why, that's the what.
Right.
And but that was what I believed I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And what I didn't realize is that the why was also for me to be proud, and is to be happy, and to live a life, professional life, which was in sync with my personal life. But that I hadn't integrated all that.
Sure.
Today, I can tell you that doing just different 3D watches is not at all why we exist.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually much broader. We call it challenge and try. Is not only do we look at our industry and try to challenge it and try stuff which has never been done, but we challenge ourselves consistently and constantly. If we've been doing the same thing for 2-3 years, even the way we think, the way we function, we challenge it. And
Sure.
Therefore, my whole team is in that mindset. I have to hire people who are capable of assuming that whatever they're doing right now, I'm going to challenge, or they should challenge, which would even be better, and try and do it differently. So take the Mad One, if you see what it is, this $3,000 watch we just came out with last year.
Yeah, I want to talk about that for sure. Yeah.
So that whole piece, no sane entrepreneur who's now got a following and a consistency which is recognized for what it does, which is this very high-end, beautiful, hand-finished $150,000 pieces of watchmaking, would go and do what we've just done.
Right.
But we do it because that's how we function.
Yeah.
So actually, if you think about it, I created first the horological machines, which are my 3D kinetic art pieces. Then when people started recognizing it, I go and get everybody on the wrong foot by creating a legacy machines, which is a round watch with a white dial and Roman numerals. And I used to remember when I said, when I created it, MB&F is like, if you want a round watch with white dials and Roman numerals, go and see all the other guys.
Right.
5, 6, 7 years later, I come up with my piece. So then we do that. Then we start creating the mad galleries when we're totally clueless of what a gallery is or even retail. Nobody in my team, me included, had never done retail. Right. So we curate these crazy mad galleries and kinetic art. We start designing clocks which look like robots and music boxes looking like spaceships. And everybody knows that there is no more market for clocks or music boxes, and definitely not shaped in those weird shapes. And that actually resuscitates and helps L'Épée and Rouge get out of more or less bankruptcy and actually thrive. So we have no idea. We try stuff. Then when all of this seems to be working very well, I decide to take an enormous risk and create a watch for women, which is actually the watch I wanted to create for my wife and my daughters. And everybody knows that women want ultra thin, non-complicated watches, and we create a 2 centimeter high flying tourbillon, and it actually is a success. Now, again, a success at our level. Let's not go crazy. I mean, that's 25 to 30 pieces a year. Now, that's the beauty of having a very small company. Is success doesn't have to be nuts. Right. Finding 25 customers a year is already a great success. Now, of course, if I was a 50,000 watch a year company, would I have the guts to create what I'm doing?
Yeah.
I'm not sure about that.
How many pieces are you creating annually, average?
So in 2013, when my first daughter was born, I decided the company's not going to grow anymore. And that year we were doing about 280 watches a year.
Okay.
And so we've stuck between 215 and 280 from 2013 to 2021.
Right.
And now the demand being absolutely, utterly bonkers and waiting lists going to 3, 4, 5, 10 years on some references, we have to increase. So we're trying to increase by 60, 70 watches a year, which is peanuts compared to the demand, but we just can't stay where we were. It doesn't really make any sense. So we're going to try and do about 340 pieces this year.
Great.
And then we'll take it from there.
That's great. Why is collaboration important to you?
So there are two ways of two sorts of collaborations. Every MB&F is a source of collaboration. The fact that I just have the idea and all these incredible artisans, watchmakers, engineers transform it into a reality. So there's a collaboration to create. And then there's the collabs where I basically bring ideas to other manufacturers. That's what we call co-creations, like the Lépée clocks or the Roche music boxes or Caran d'Ache pens, and all sorts of other things we're working on. And then there's another collaboration where I invite creators I admire to change my creations. And that's the ultimate, that's the pinnacle, because that's really letting go.
Yeah.
As a creator, you speak to any creative directors or owners who are creators, their babies, nobody is allowed to touch them.
Right.
It's my way or the highway. So when you get to a level where you accept that somebody else modifies something you thought was already great, they bring their DNA into it and therefore create something which you would never have done, that's when you realize you've reached a level where you've let go. And that's when, so typically I'll ask friends or like Alain Silberstein or Stepan Sarpaneva or the H. Moser guys or even Bulgari recently. I mean, I was terrified to work with a $3 billion company to come and change one of my babies. And they were incredible. I mean, that team was amazing. So you have to work with people you admire. You need to have common goals. You cannot have one of the two entities wanting to make money, because a great collab is never about money. It's about great products. And you can't have one saying, how can we make money, and the other one trying to do, let's create something incredible. So that weeds out a lot of potential collaborations. And then you need to be very different, because it's pointless to create a kid with somebody who's exactly like you.
Right.
It's when you have, I mean, maybe it's my fact of being issued from a German Indian person that I sort of apply that. So I try and do collabs with people who are very different from me in their creative process.
Right. Sure. Well, when you're consistently pushing the envelope from a design, manufacturing, et cetera, process, like how do you mitigate stress? Because there's got to be things that just like, I'm sorry?
Stress is the adrenaline. Being scared is the adrenaline. Once you start feeling in your comfort zone, at least me, I know a lot of creators not like that. Yeah. When I start feeling that this is easy, I freak out. I'm like, this is easy is boring. Easy doesn't bring pride, and pride being the ultimate goal. And I've in my 17 years, I can tell you that every time I created a product where I was terrified, it's been one of our most important creations in our history. Maybe not always sales-wise, but it's what people remember. While the pieces, I thought, oh, okay, let's do a variation and I'm sure people will want it, usually have been flops and everybody's forgotten about them and their resale value is not where it should be. So it's taught me that just take that adrenaline risk, be terrified, And that's what you will be proud of on the last day of your life.
Yeah, that's sound advice, I would say. You have mentioned your collaboration with Moser, and I either read or heard you in an interview once talk about how you took a lot of a risk to do that collaboration. Do you remember what that risk was?
Well, the risk was that we did a double collab, meaning I invited the H. Moser team to modify one of my pieces. That's normal with me. But then Edouard Mellon, who's pretty brilliant, looked at me and said, "But what's in it for me?" I said, "Sorry?"
Oh, I see.
Fume dials and whatever. So you're going to have a collab MB&F and H. Moser. But what does H. Moser get? So you have to do something for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, Edward, you create round, more or less classic watches with cool dials. And I love what you do. Otherwise, I would invite you to modify one of my pieces. But what can I do for you? And he said, I don't know. Come on, think about it. And that's how we designed for them the watch with the dial at an angle, and we took them out of their comfort zone, and they were very courageous and they had to completely modify a movement, re-engineer it, bring the cylindrical hairspring into their tourbillon, etc., etc.
I see.
It was a big leap of faith for them, but again, it was oh God, it was totally worthwhile. I think we'll both agree on that one. And it was interesting because when we presented them, it was in Dubai, a bit more than 2 years ago. The world was a different world in those days.
Right.
Everybody was pre-COVID, before COVID, and everybody was going bananas, and everybody wanted to order them by 5s or 10s. And Edward looked at me like, "Oh, what else are we going to do? Are we going to launch new colors?" And I was like, no, we have to accept that we've done something pretty amazing. It's been a long odyssey to get there. But even though it is a success, because it's a success, we have to accept that we're not going to do it anymore.
Right.
So yes, I would love, and we are going to work together with H. Moser on other products in the future, but we have to leave a couple of years go by and not do the same thing.
Yeah. Last year, you collaborated, like you mentioned before, with Fabrizio, the creative director of Bulgari. You guys met in 2017. Is 4 years a common length of time for a collaboration to come to light, or no?
Actually, no. Collaborations can last. People have been bumping into for decades,
Right.
where at some point we'll work together. But in this case, it was interesting. I actually met him for the first time in Dubai Watch Week 2017, and introduced myself, and we went to have a coffee, and I discovered that he loves what we do, which was really nice because I'm a big fan of his work.
Mm-hmm.
And he started sketching at that coffee table, and like, oh, it would be cool if, and we started. He created this really cool HM5 Bulgari, which will never see the light, but it was really cool, and other things, and maybe with the Bulgari touch we can do this, huh? And we just had such a ball. It was such an amazing moment, but we both looked at each other going, is this going to happen? And he said, no, probably not.
Right.
And then 2 years later, I bump into him at the Grand Prix of Watchmaking of Geneva, and he's with Antoine Pin, who had just been appointed the new managing director of Bulgari Watches, and who introduces himself. And I just look at him and jokingly I said, so can we do a collab? And he says, yeah, why not? So I just think he's being polite.
Right.
And then he looks at me, we continue talking, and he looks at me and says, are you going to be in Dubai Watch Week in 3 weeks? I'm like, yeah, of course. So he said, like, okay, let's meet up, and we have breakfast with Antoine and Fabrizio. So therefore, 2 years later, that's 2019. And Fabrizio is again sketching like crazy. That's all he does. I mean, he's incredible. You spend 10 minutes with him and he starts sketching.
Right.
And Antoine probably detects that there's a great chemistry happening here. Mm-hmm. And he says, okay, let's do this.
Very cool.
I just started with the Flying T, which had just actually won the Grand Prix of watchmaking. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, look, guys, I'm not a jeweler. I've just created this lady's watch. Would you like to rework it? And they said, yeah. And this is now November 2019. And when we actually really started the project, in the middle of lockdown. So March 2020, 4 or 5 months later, the world stops and we start doing Zoom meetings. The beginning of Zoom. I'd never even heard of Zoom.
Yeah, same. Yeah.
And Fabrizio is sketching on his side of the Zoom, and suddenly he shows a drawing with what's going to become the Allegra. And the whole team of Bulgari is that side, my team is this side, and we like, go, yeah, okay, let's do this.
Wow.
It's a Zoom baby. It's crazy. It's a Dubai Watch Week and Zoom baby.
That's very cool. Very, very cool. How do you view competition?
Very favorably. We need more people like us. We can't, if you look at artistic movements, they were never created by one single person,
Yeah.
single artist. If you take the Impressionists, they completely modified the world of art, which has been pretty much the same for a good century, if not more, because they were a whole group. There was Monet, Manet, Renoir, Cézanne, Pissarro, and they were pals, and they were all together, and they were saying, "Excuse me, fuck the system.
Yeah.
It's our art." And we need more people to believe that watchmaking can be different. And we're a few of us. Don't get me wrong, huh? And I don't see them as competition. I see them as friends. I see them together. We're going to change this world. If you take the likes of the Urwerk team and the Ressence and Benoit and others, we're slowly, it's taken us time. We're changing the perception of what a watch could be. And so more the merrier. But, and I insist on that, we congregate only with people who share the same passion, and that passion has to be incredible products and not being successful at business.
Sure.
There are also brands created with shareholder money and mercenary CEOs who think, oh, we can make a bit of money out of this. That's not what we congregate. We don't congregate with those guys.
Right. Well, again, Max, I want to be sensitive of your time, but I do want to run through some of these questions. Not really rapid fire, but kind of. Your rotor looks like a battle axe. Where does that come from?
Grandizer. So Grandizer, you've probably never heard of in the US. It was early 80s. Is one of the very first Japanese manga where there was a transformer robot. And Grandizer was a prince of another planet who'd arrived on Earth, transformer robot, and who was actually the last defense for the Earth against the other horrible aliens who had destroyed his planet, and they were coming to destroy Earth now, the Golgoths. And so I was 12, 13, and every day when I came back from school, there was 20 minutes of Grandizer saving the world, and I would look at that while I was eating probably my chocolate biscuit, and then I would go into my room and either work or play, and so I was brought up on I was Grandizer. I had this whole thing of saving the world. I still a little bit have that complex, and so initially when I designed the rotor of HM1, and I worked with the incredibly great and competent designer called Eric Giraud, and I still work with Eric for the last 17 years. We always work a little bit like a competition, where on different details, I'll say, you think about it, I'll think about it, and we meet and we compare notes, and I will basically choose the idea I think is better. It's often his, sometimes it's mine, so often it's mine, it depends. And he came up with a rotor which was very technical with screws and bolts and things like that. And I came up with Grandizer battle axe, and he looked at me and said, yeah, why not?
Cool.
And that's how it started. But it's interesting is that on first HM1, I never mentioned the influence because I was actually, I was ashamed of it, because you don't create $180,000 piece of high-end watchmaking putting Japanese transformer robot mangas into it.
Right.
It took me till about HM2 where I reproduced the same rotor, and a journalist actually one day asked me, he's like, what's the influence of that? And I went, Grandizer. Sorry, it's Grandizer. And luckily for me, the journalist is half French, half Chinese, and it was Hong Kong. And actually, it wasn't. It was I didn't even know the name Grandizer. In French, it was Goldorak. So I said Goldorak, and he said, "Oh, Goldorak," and he'd been brought up in France. He's like, "Oh, I love Goldorak," and I realized that there's a whole generation of old fogies like me today who were brought up in Europe. If you ask Italians, French, Lebanese, who my age, we were all brought up on Goldorak.
Oh wow, that's crazy. That's so cool though. I mean, but again, it's the story, right? And the familiarity and all that makes these things special. How do you decide how many of each design will be made? Is it a manufacturing constraint at all, or is it just you pick a number? How do you decide?
Rule of thumb,
Mm.
it's been for I mean, except for the first two iterations, which that's also so HM1 when I launched it, I knew that I needed to do 100 movements to amortize the insane investment.
Okay, yeah.
Whatever happened, so I announced it's going to be 100 movements, and it's going to take us, I don't know, 4 or 5 years to do them. Then HM2, I was emboldened because HM1 sold well and it was euphoria. And so my very first two pieces of HM2, I said limited edition of 125 each. And my retailers went ballistic and they ordered them by tens because it was that era.
Yeah.
And then the world collapsed. And I think we barely made 46 or 47 of each
Oh wow.
because nobody wanted to buy them.
Right.
That sort of, that burnt me. So since then, I've always done limited editions where I think it's much less than what I think the market wants.
Mm. Sure.
And so if I think we can sell 50, I'll do an edition of 25. And so that's been the case for all these years. And now, in the last 2 years, we've shifted, and virtually, and you're going to see that specifically this year, we started last year, virtually everything we're coming out with is more or less not limited.
Does that affect pricing at all? MSRP?
No, why I'm doing that is it was because actually in the watch I'm wearing, which is my Perpetual Evo, which we launched in 3x15 in zirconium in 2020.
It's so good. I love it on the white strap. It's awesome. It's so good.
So that piece, when we launched, something happened. I remember it was our US retailer, well, one of our US retailers, Steven Silver.
Okay.
We invited 8 of his VIP customers to his home for a pre-launch. So we'd actually sent the watch down there so he could show it to his VIPs. And his allocation was, I think, 2 or 3 pieces out of the 45.
Yeah.
And something happened. What happened is that the 8 of his VIP customers who came to dinner at his place wanted to buy the watch. And that was a horrible moment for Stephen because you're inviting people to your home to present something. They say, I want it, and you're telling them you can't have it.
Right.
So 6 out of 8 were completely upset with him and said, like, what the hell? I mean, why are you even inviting me? And when he related that to me, I was like, oh my gosh, that's horrible. I wouldn't want to live that. So from there, we started saying, okay, we're not going to limit them, but it's going to be limited production de facto. We still only make probably 25 LM Perpetual Evos a year on the new titanium version, which is not limited. And if you can't get it this year, you'll maybe get it next year. If you can't get it next year, so now I think we're at 2025 now.
Oh wow.
Which is about 3 years.
Right.
So you still can get it, but we're not going to insult you and say you can't get it. I invite you and then tell you can't get it.
Right, right. Well, I do want to talk about the Mad One you released. Then the Mad One Red came out. Do you characterize this as, and I'm using quotes here, an entry level piece? Like, how do you characterize it? How did it even come about?
Well, first of all, it's not an MB&F, and I have to really emphasize that.
It's a different brand, right?
Different brand. It's actually brand. It's what we call them editions. When art galleries have artists, They from time to time will finance an edition with them, and that's an edition. So it's if you look, there's nothing written MB&F anywhere on it.
Right.
Why? Even though it's been thought up by the same team, it is not at all made in the same process.
Okay.
We've got a Miyota movement, which has been modified in Switzerland, but it's a Miyota, which is a great industrial movement, but it's Miyota. The case is made in Asia. So we're not at all at the levels of insane hand finish, etc., that we have on MB&F.
Sure.
Now, why did I create that is for my friends and family, because there's a very big frustration as a creator where everybody you love cannot own one of your pieces.
Right.
And so I've been working for many years on something which would be at a lower price point. I created actually in 2014 what it looks like the Mad One today. And it was going to be a whole new brand. So I created a whole brand around this, and there was going to be all sorts of other products. And I killed that project in 2018. Why? Because I realized in 2018, I don't have enough time for my family. I don't have enough time for MB&F. I'm consistently feeling guilty one way or the other.
Right.
How am I going to create a second brand? And you realize that when you create a brand, it's forever.
Right.
You can't create a brand and then stop it. That in those days, at least, that didn't exist. So we just shelved the whole project. I mean, we've been working on it for 4 years.
Oh, wow.
Then in 2020, early 2020, when lockdown happened and we were doing Zooms with the team, brainstorming how can we save our company, somebody said, well, we've got this product we've designed and already engineered. And I was like, dude, we're not going to create a new brand. The world is falling apart. And during that brainstorming, I sort of said, well, maybe there is a solution. We call it a Mad edition. We've got Mad galleries. It's an edition. So we just do a one drop.
Right.
And we do that. That was in March 2020. By June 2020, we realized that the world is maybe falling apart, but we're doing incredibly well, even though we didn't expect it. Yeah. So I said, okay, well, we'll do this and we'll use it as a thank you. So we only allowed our friends, meaning all the suppliers who worked with us for the last 17 years, and the tribe, all the MB&F owners, to have access to it, because we were only going to make a few hundred pieces.
Right.
And it's never been seen as a business. And so we just sent emails out in June last year to the people who were allocated the watches. We never put it on our website. We never put it on social media. And the world went ballistic.
Yeah, that's just the kind of thing that would do that. Now, I read somewhere you thought of this during an acupuncture session?
It's true. It's very much true. Yeah.
Wait, so what, the design itself, or just the concept of Miyota mixed with parts, or like what?
No, the idea of turning a movement upside down and using cylinders to turn underneath, which that's what it is. So originally I thought of it as an MB&F.
Right.
And why acupuncture? Because I create when I'm completely cut off from the world. Yeah. I cannot create in discussions. I don't create in front of my computer. I don't create in meetings. I've always created when I'm off. I used to create a lot on planes when I used to travel.
Well, it takes you back to your childhood. You were alone.
Exactly. I actually hadn't thought about that, but yeah, that's exactly it. That's my process. Yeah. And so like when you've got 20 acupuncture needles in you, you have to stay flat for an hour on that bed. There's nothing much you can do except let your mind roam.
Right.
When you let your mind wander and roam, that's where you hit creative points, at least for me.
Sure.
I thought of that. But I came back from that session and sat down with Serge, who's my partner in the company and our CTO for the last 15 years. And I said, but actually, if we put an industrial movement in there, we can actually make it at a much lower price point, can't we? And he said, yeah, probably. Yeah, let me think it out. But there are a lot of subtleties and a lot of technical innovations in that Mad One, which initially I was like, why didn't anybody think about this? Now, first of all, because often people don't think differently, but also because when we started wanting to make it come to life, we realized all the technical innovations we had to find and solutions we had to find to actually make it to come to life. And if you look at the case, for example, there is not one single screw you will see in it.
Right.
How is this all assembled, et cetera, et cetera. And also, how do you get to that price with that quality of finishing? When people have a Mad One in hand, they're like, $3,000. How is that possible?
Right. Right.
And, so it's interesting, all the different innovations and solutions we had to find. So it took some time. So yeah, all that to say, it started on acupuncture.
That's so funny. Okay, just a few more, honestly. But what? Okay, so I also read somewhere that you had thought of a watch that was inspired by a movie you watched on an airplane. What was the movie?
I can't tell you. I can't
You can't tell me the movie.
process. It's yes, it was actually not a very good movie. There was one character
Okay.
name and I had a specific talent. And I can't tell you because that product is still way away because we keep on pushing it over. And I don't
Okay.
want to give it out. Because if I give you the name, it's just spoil it.
Totally. No, that's fair.
Even bad movies can give great ideas.
Yeah.
Having suddenly an idea just pop into your head.
Oh, that's great. What? Okay, so many would argue for many people, watches serve as an escape, right? Like it gets their mind off of maybe the daily rigmarole, so to speak. What do you do in your free time? Like what? How are you spending your free time, or is it just watch it? Because nobody has more fun than you, I would imagine.
So before I had a family, I used to work all the time.
Hmm.
And when I had my first daughter, when we had our first daughter, and now we've got two daughters, every piece of free time I can find is with them.
That's great.
But I creating driving MB&F is such insane fun, and it's also an incredible responsibility. And there've been some really tough years. I mean, entrepreneurship, I don't have to tell you, is a complicated thing, especially when you're an outlier doing something that nobody understands usually. But I see it as I say Alain Silberstein, who writes on each of his watches, used to write le plus beau est d'avoir son métier pour passion, something like that. Or sa passion pour métier. Okay. Basically, the most beautiful is to have your passion as a work.
Right.
So for me, it's never been work,
Right.
even though there's been a lot of grind. But I never really saw my dad growing up. His way of telling us that he loved us was to work all the time to try and bring some money home,
Right.
to be able to afford a house and to be able to afford that private school. And that was his way of showing us that he loved us.
Right.
I would have preferred him to work less and spend more time with me,
Sure.
a football match or do stuff with me, which he never did. So I don't want to be that dad. So now I just carved out a really big part of my life, and it's the family now.
Yeah. They always say you become the parent you wish you had.
You try.
You try. Right. Right. Sure. What was your first watch ever?
Ever was probably we were in that house, so I was probably 7 years old. It was a hand winding little round watch from a brand called Jean Perret. I don't even know if it exists. And I remember it very well because one of the very few traditions my dad and I had was that every night before going to bed, he would come and say goodnight to me, and I would wind that watch up in front of him.
Oh, cool.
And then he would say goodnight to me. And just before he would switch off the light, I would always put it under the bedside table lamp. So the little tritium dots and the little tritium on the hands would light up. And I could actually see the time on my bedside table. So those are little things which trigger memories.
Right.
Yeah, that was probably my very first watch.
Well, again, not to go too deep here, but not seeing your dad a lot as a child, the times you did see him, a watch was present.
Yeah.
So maybe discovering it in the age of 24 or whatever, asking about Jaeger, it's like maybe it was just subconscious this whole time.
I remember also that my dad had Omegas,
Okay.
have Tissot. That's how a good Swiss household would function. It's my dad would buy the Omega, which was the higher end brand, and get me a Tissot, and I was looking at his Omegas, which seemed probably cooler.
Yeah.
And but watches were not a thing because I was brought up in the quartz era,
Right.
and so yeah, they were. I mean, designs were really cool in those days. If you look at the 70s watches,
Yeah.
they are so much more fun than what was before and what was after.
Well, it's like looking at old cars, right? They all used to look different and now they can't because of aerodynamics and fuel economy and all the nonsense, which obviously before we go, I have to ask you a couple car questions given that we're on the Standard Age podcast. But your first car, what was it?
Oh, I prefer to forget that one. Um,
Many do.
my very first car was my mum's car she gave me, which was a Fiat 127 Special, because the Special had a third door. Nice. And it actually burnt down in our parking lot. I have no idea how that happened. I was not culprit on that one. And it auto-ignited one day and it got fire. So then they bought me an Opel Corsa, which you probably have no idea what that is in the US.
Opel, sure.
A little boxy car. And that was my parents, actually. I was supposed to get a motorcycle when I was 16. You could get these 40-kilometer motorcycles.
Yeah.
I had already bought the helmet, and a poor motorcycle got hit by a car in front of my mom. Not she didn't hit him, but just like when I was 15 and a half.
Right. So
completely traumatized. Yeah. And I get it today. I mean, the idea that my kids would have a motorcycle is unthinkable for me. And she said, no motorcycle. So I went bananas on her. I went complete ape shit. And she said, okay, but then we'll buy you a car when you're 18. Oh. And that Opel Corsa was the car they got me, which was the car which accompanied me through my university years. Yeah.
Oh, it's amazing. What do you drive today?
The car I love.
Yeah.
The one which is my so for many, I used to have cars like my watches, which were always weird and handmade.
Okay.
So I had a TVR for 9 years. I had a TVR Griffith 500, which I loved, but it was totally, absolutely insane. And it's every time I got out of a curve, I was happy I was still alive.
Right.
And it's basically it's a modern AC Cobra, a TVR Griffith. And then I sold it 11 years ago. I got myself a Wiesmann MF4S, which is absolutely incredible car. They also went bankrupt. I mean, I'm a specialist in buying cars where brands go bankrupt. And that Wiesmann is not only I find completely stunning, but it's to drive. It's incredible. It's got the old V8 M3 engine.
Right.
It's 250 kilos lighter, and it's no compromise. It's a aluminium monoblock racing chassis. And so when these guys like Wiesmann, they used to make 150 cars a year.
Yeah.
4 different models. And so they didn't care. I mean, when you create a Porsche, you have to make sure that all the people who've got a lot of money but don't know how to drive don't kill them. So of course, we're going to make them hyper safe, and they're incredibly safe and incredible driving machines. But I mean, you can do every stupid thing under the sun and you will not drive off the road.
Right.
People at TVR and Wiesmann, they assume that you know how to drive. So and it gives so much more adrenaline when you drive it.
Yeah, for sure. Max, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. I really appreciate your time.
It's absolutely likewise. Great questions. Thank you for having read up so much. I mean, I'm so impressed that you know so much. I'm very, very grateful. So thank you very much. I hope it's interesting for the people who listening, and I look forward to more.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll be more than thrilled. Again, thank you so much. Hey guys, Wesley here. If you liked what you heard, maybe tell a friend about the Standard H podcast. And if you have a moment, please rate and review the show as it helps others discover this podcast. Shout out to Jensen Reed and Super Beautiful for the theme track, as well as to Clear Audio for the noise canceling headphones. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.